we're getting familiar with two of these concepts. The idea of a variable. So these are the labels we create. So Fred is a label we put on a box, or Mary. We've just seen in the previous lesson a few others, like is sunny. These are the variables where we store something in. And what we store in these variables is data, information that can have different types: integer, float, string, turtle, or the Boolean data type, true or false. Let's create another of these variables, and I'm going to call it carry on. And I'm going to make it equal to, notice that carry on is underlined in red, because at the moment my editor is saying, I have no idea what you've typed there. Beware, that's a mistake if you run this code. But that's okay, because the equal says I'm going to tell you what this is. And I'm going to make it equal to true. So I've taken the Boolean value true, put it in a box, and labeled it carry on. So from now on, whenever I say carry on, Python will look and say, oh, I know what this is. There's a box labeled carry on. What's inside it? True. Why is this important? Well, why am I doing that? Let's find out. Let me go to the next line, line 15. You may remember that while needs to be followed by something that Python understands as either true or false. At the moment, I wrote true there. What happens if I write carry on? Well, carry on is true. So in this case, it's the same thing. You might think, okay, I've taken something that was perfectly fine in one line, and now I've split it into two lines and created a new variable. Why do I need to do this? Let's find out. The way the while loop works is the first time it comes to line 15, it checks whether whatever comes after while is true or false, or can understand as true or false. If it's true, it will execute those lines of code. And at the end, in this case on line 20, it goes back, it loops back, that's why it's loop, to line 15, and checks that again. It checks whether carry on is still true. Why? Because it is possible that this has changed. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to say at some point in our code, if something happens, change carry on from true to false. Where do I want to do that? In my case, I want to do that when Fred has reached 100. So I'm going to say, I'm going to leave that printout. I'm still going to print out Fred has reached the end. But I'm also going to add another line, which says carry on is now equal to false. And a reminder, we can only have one variable name carry on, one label carry on. So the moment I assign false to carry on, whatever was inside carry on before, which happened to be true, is gone. It's no longer stored in that box. So when this line happens, when Fred's position is 100, these two lines will happen, including changing carry on to false. So when the loop loops back to while carry on is now false. And that is the signal we are sending the loop. You no longer need to repeat this. You can now move on with the rest of your code. It's a bit like a switch. We're switching the loop on or off. It starts off as on, but at some point we're switching it off. And in this case, there's nothing left after the loop. We'll add something in a bit. Let's check that this works. So now they're both moving until at some point soon, there you go, Fred has reached the end, and you can see that the animation has stopped. They've stopped moving because the loop that was moving Fred and Mary forward by one step every time is no longer running. And to convince you that the program has moved on, let me write something else here. Print the end, as they do in the old, as they did in the old films and movies. Notice that print the end does not have that indent, that space, which means it's not part of the while loop. So the while loop will repeat that chunk of code until it stops repeating it. In this case, until carry on becomes false. When that happens, it moves on. In this case, moving on means printing the end at the end. Let's find out. We're moving, and soon, there you go, Fred has reached the end, and we also have the end written out and printed out. Good. There's a bit more we can tidy up, and there's a bit more we can dive into. But let's stop here for this lesson, and then we'll carry on in the next lesson to make sure we understand all of the all of the bits that are happening in this relatively short bit of code, but there's plenty happening in there.